Hey, good morning, mediums. Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. It's episode 2, or excuse me, it's season 2, episode 70. I am Josh Hayes here with my co-hosts, Scott Moon and Ralph Kern. And today, hopefully, the author of the Minds of Men novel, Kacey Ezell, joins the show. She's written several short stories, including the cover story Not in Vain for the Black Tide Rising anthology by Baen Books, set in John Ringo's zombie apocalypse universe.
Awesome.
And as more recently, she's been featured in a number of anthologies by Chris Kennedy and Mark Wandry, set in the Four Horsemen universe. On top of a very impressive career, she's also a pilot in the Air Force. She's been writing and publishing for a while now, including, like I said, several short stories and very traditional anthologies. And today, hopefully, she'll join us to talk about her writing journey. She's having some issues with Hangouts right now, so we're going to try to get that worked out while we're starting the show here, but we wanted to press on, and Ralph has not been on the show for a while. So Ralph, welcome back, and sorry about your overlay. And what have you been up to, bud?
Well, mostly I've been miserable about the fact I haven't had an overlay, unlike someone else who's recently joined the show.
Blah, blah, blah.
There's no justice.
I won't hold that against you guys. I won't hold that against you. Yeah, it's good to be back on. What's been happening with me this week? I have the week off work, so I've been doing a bit of fitness and also cracking on with getting book 3 of my series finished, or the first draft finished, I should say, which I managed to do last night at about 3 o'clock in the morning. I typed those magic 3 letters, FIN, so that was good.
Fin.
Fin.
For the uneducated.
Fin.
Including me. That's the end.
Not Fin. I've still got to go through it a few times. Yeah,
Right.
That was nice. That was pleasing. What about you, Scott? What have you been up to?
I didn't see that coming. I'm joking. No, I'm excited about your series because I want to get out of the first book I have in audio was freaking awesome. So I want to get the whole thing going. For me this week, had an interesting day at work. Yesterday was pretty busy. One of my officers got bit by a police canine while we're apprehending a suspect, which is not what you're expecting to have happen. But, we were standing right next to this little tiny basement, and he bit the other officer. And I was like, oh, God, because getting that dog off is scary. So anyway, then we have to still get the suspect guy. So I gave him stern verbal commands. I think he heard in the tone of my voice that maybe he should just come out now.
Yeah.
But the officer was he was very cool about it. But I came out when I thought that they'd given him some drugs for pain. By the time I got to him, he's like, no, man, I'm okay. Like, you look like it hurt, dude.
We had some riots a few years ago in England. The biggest riots we've had, and one of my jobs was in the unit that was protecting the hospital, and we had a big row of rioters who'd been bit on the arse by
now serving 137
by our furry land sharks,
right?
And then as we go into another room, there's about 3 or 4 cops as well who stood in the wrong place when let the dogs off their leash.
It's very counterintuitive.
They had very glum looks on their faces.
What you're supposed to do is what you're supposed
kneeling
to do
on a chair with their asses in the air.
Right. You're supposed to not move, which is it goes against all your instincts. In that type of situation. So I told him, thanks for taking the bite for me. Anyway.
I'm not a dog lover in the slightest.
See, I love dogs, and when we do those types of things, I'm always right there by the handler because somebody's got to protect the handler while they're protecting the dog. And so anyway, that's neither here nor there. Josh is still working on those tech difficulties.
I was going to say, speaking of canines, we were on a car chase one day where the suspect crashed, and there was probably about 10 to 12 of us chasing in this big long line, a whole bunch of sirens and cop car lights. And he bottomed down on a ravine coming back up to the road. And so we all get out and we're all running up to the car. As soon as I jump out of my car and start running, I hear and I turn around, and the state guy with his canine has got out of his car and the dog is out. He's self-deployed and running straight at me. And I turned around and put my hands up in the air. I said, no. And and the trooper fortunately was able to call him back, but I definitely would have been canine breakfast.
That's what people understand is they go for whoever's being the most active at the time. So it looks like we might have had some success with the technical genius that is Josh Hayes.
It's true. It's true. Hey, Kacey, are you there?
See?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Hey, Kacey.
Yay!
Hi.
Hey.
You missed all of our dog bite stories, but you know we can cover that later.
Spinning the disc.
Oh, sorry, darn.
Oh no, it's quite all right. Awesome. So I read in your intro that you've written several short stories for Bain and then now Chris Kennedy and Mark Wandery.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that you were a pilot. Are you still a pilot in the military?
I am. Yeah, I actually was working just this weekend. I fly UH-1 helicopters in the Washington, D.C. area. So
very awesome.
That's cool.
In fact, these are my wings because I'm a pilot and therefore arrogant by definition. I have to advertise that to the world.
You gotta wear the wings all the time.
That's definitely
it's all part of the culture, isn't it? All part of the culture.
Yeah. I would open every conversation with that. Scott Moon, pilot.
Well, we're worse than vegan CrossFitters, and we take a lot of pride in that. So,
firefighters that are also vegan and crossfighter.
And CrossFitters, yeah.
So. Those draggers.
So we usually try to start the show out with a little bit about you. We kind of went against the grain here on today's show, but we finally managed to have you on, which is great. We've been featured in a few credits more. That was an anthology that you were in, and Scott and I were both in.
Yes, I loved your stories. It was very cool how they integrated together. I wanted to tell you guys that.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
It nearly killed us both.
Yeah.
that was fun. A fun collaborative project.
Beads of sweat coming down your face at times.
There may or may not have been a round of Jello wrestling to figure out whose plot line was gonna.
That's usually how you have to achieve supremacy somehow. You know,
right?
Video where it didn't happen.
Yeah. Well, we ran out of Jello, and then I was hungry. So. But please, for our audience members that may not be familiar with you, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in writing?
Sure. So my name is Kacey Ezell. I got started in writing because I always made up stories as a kid, and I was a very early reader. And my mom, I think one day, I remember pretty clearly, I think she was just trying to get me to leave her alone for 5 minutes. She put a copy of Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Drums into my hands when I was about 7 years old and said, "Here, this is for kids. Go away and read it." And I did, and that was my introduction to science fiction fantasy and to dragons, and both of which have remained lifelong obsessions. I'm pretty fond of telling the story that when I decided that when I grew up I wanted to be a dragon rider, which is rather difficult considering that there's not a lot of dragons running around. I know, me too. So, as the logical 9-year-old that I was at the time, I think we went to an air show or something. My parents were also in the Air Force, and we were stationed overseas in the Philippines at the time. And I think we went to an air show, and I remember watching the demo team perform and thinking, well, it's kind of like flying a dragon. And so I decided that I wanted to be a pilot. And so that was what I wanted to do. So when I graduated from high school, I went to college at the United States Air Force Academy, got commissioned in 1999, got a pilot training slot, and shortly before pilot training, sorry, we're gonna have a guest appearance here by my cat, I think.
Yeah, we love guest appearances.
So I decided, I figured out that helicopters were a lot more fun than fixed wing aircraft. And so I decided I wanted to fly helicopters, and got my wings in 2001. And that's what I've been doing ever since. As far as writing professionally, yep, there's Pearl. Say hi, Pearl. Sorry, guys.
There you go.
Hey, Pearl.
Hi.
Oh, you guys went blank. Are you still there?
No, we're still here.
Oh, she just, okay, good. as far as writing professionally is concerned, that's all happened by really happy accident, and mostly through the friends that I've made. I met John Ringo at Dragon Con in, I think it was 2004. And we became friends. I consulted with him on, once he found out that I was a helicopter pilot, he was working on the, if you're familiar with his work, he was working on the Ghost series. He's got some helicopter stuff in there. So he asked me if I could review his scenes, and I did. You know, we became great friends. And when I was deployed to Iraq in 2009, he'd been asked to pick up the Citizens Project, which was an anthology that Baen was putting out, that was all military science fiction written exclusively by military veterans. And the original editor had unfortunately passed away, and John was asked to pick the project up. And he decided he wanted to include, along with the reprints and things that they were already doing, he wanted to include some new voices. And so he reached out to me and said, you know, hey, I know you write a little bit. I finished my super useful Masters of Fine Arts in Creative Writing a few years prior. And so he was like, I know you've, it's kind of like getting a tattoo. Like it's like a rite of passage. You have to have one. But
you can't show it to everybody because not everybody feels good about it.
That's right, because then no one will think it's cool.
That's right.
but anyway, he asked me, you know, do you have anything that would work for this? And to which I replied, no, but I could. And about 24 hours later, I sent him the first draft of my story, Light, that was included in that anthology. And so I'm not kidding when I say at conventions that John Ringo handed me my writing career on a silver platter. So
that's awesome.
John Ringo's awesome. I have to say
he's a great guy.
For the record.
He really is. He really is. The story of how, like the specifics of how we met is actually, it's kind of a cool story, but it's kind of gut-wrenching, and I'm happy to tell you guys if you want to hear it.
Yeah, go for it.
All right.
So I went through pilot training starting in 2000. And the way it works for Air Force helicopter pilots is we do the first part of our training at an Air Force UPT base, which stands for Undergraduate Pilot Training. And we fly, at the time we flew T-37s because I'm old. Now they fly T-6s. But after you're done with T-37s, you do what's called track select. And there's basically 4 possible tracks. There's the fighter bomber track, which means you go on to fly the advanced trainer, the T-38, which is a super cool jet. And then there's the heavy track where you usually go on and fly T-1s. And there are some exceptions to this, but usually you go on and fly T-1s, and that's for like the strat air, like the cargo and air refueling, all that kind of stuff. And then if you track C-130s, some guys go to T-1s first, but typically most people go to Pensacola and fly with the Navy out there and learn about turboprop stuff. But if you go to helicopters, you go to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and you, at least we did, fly with the Army for a little while on H model Hueys, and then you move over to the Air Force section of the course, get your wings from the Air Force, but it's all done at Fort Rucker, Alabama. So I met this girl named Tamara Archuleta. When we got to Fort Rucker, we were classmates, and we hated each other. We didn't like each other at all. She was a total bitch. I was a total bitch. You know, we were very competitive with one another.
Were you like Maverick and Ice Woman?
Exactly.
Only prettier, much prettier. But
does the story end? You can be my wingman anytime.
That's right. But we were sitting in our van going out to the stage field to go fly one day, which is the place where the helicopters were actually physically located. And it was like the week prior to Labor Day, and we were talking in the van about, what's everyone's Labor Day plans. And they got to me, and I'm sitting in the very back row because clearly I'm too cool for anything else. And they're like, what are you doing this weekend? And I'm like, oh God, here it comes. Because I was kind of closeted about being a nerd, But I was like, you know what? F it. I don't care. And so in my best, lean back, arrogant, hook my elbows on the back of the seat, whatever sort of pose, I said, I'm going to a science fiction fantasy convention in Atlanta. It was my first time I was ever going to go to Dragon Con.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And Tammy, who was sitting up front, spun around so fast I thought her head was going to pop off. And she said, you like science fiction fantasy? And I was like, yeah, I do. What of it?
Yeah.
So she was like,
what are you going to do about it?
I like science fiction fantasy. So then we started talking about it. And the result was I ended up inviting her to go with me. And that was the basis of our friendship. And we became best friends. And it was particularly poignant because 9/11 happened while we were at pilot training. So during all that uncertainty, and what's going to happen with our careers? Are we going to graduate and go right to war? All that kind of stuff, which we didn't, for the record. But,
right.
But we didn't know that at the time, and so we were together through all that, and it really bonded us and made us very close. Tammy went on to fly HH-60s, which is the Air Force's combat search and rescue helicopter, and she was stationed at Moody. I was stationed up in Montana. We didn't really get to see each other much. She went to Dragon Con the following year with her then fiance, who's still one of my best friends. And she sent me pictures. She bought this red leather bikini. I know it's a long story, but
you're good. We're all pretty much down for the
So she bought this red leather bikini that was sculpted. It's beautiful. It was sculpted in the shape of like demon hands, formed the cups of the bikini, and then also the front part of the bottom section of the bikini. It was very provocative, very beautiful, very much to her taste and her style, because she was, she liked horror and she was sort of edgy and like vampires and all that kind of stuff. Sort of a goth girl, I guess. And it was gorgeous. And I think she like marched in the parade that year wearing, carrying the Dragon Con banner, wearing that thing, which was very, very cool. Unfortunately, the following March, she was killed in a helicopter crash when her helicopter, they were on a mission and they were doing night aerial refueling. And they ended up hitting a mountain and everyone on board was killed. Which was very tragic, yeah.
Very sorry to hear that.
Oh, thank you. But the truth is, she died doing what she loved, I guess. And I know it sounds trite, but it really was true in her case. But anyway, so fast forward to, I don't know, a year or so later. It's like now Dragon Con 2004, and I'm there with Kacey, her fiance, and it was the first time that we'd gone to Dragon Con since she was killed, and we were having a blast. We were celebrating her life. We were thinking about her all the time. And this was before they remodeled. If you're familiar with Dragon Con or the hotels involved, the Hyatt, which is one of the main hotels, has since been remodeled in the lobby, but this was before all of that. And they used to have this really large balcony right off the main bar that was the main smoking area. And this was back when I smoked cigars before I quit doing that. But we were all outside and we were smoking cigars, which was another thing that Tammy loved to do. And I was actually physically smoking one. And so I bumped into someone who, I don't even remember exactly who it was, but it was one of John's friends. And he said something about, girl smoking cigars. And to be fair, I mean, it's Dragon Con, right? So I'm wearing like a tiny little skirt and a really tight t-shirt and crazy makeup. And, I'm
smoking a cigar.
Dressed, right, smoking a cigar. Right, yeah, I'm dressed for Dragon Con, right? Look, dressed like a girl who's looking to get compliments on how she looks. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, this person introduces me to John Ringo, and John's like, man, this is, you look great, and he goes, you know what, though, I got to tell you about this goddess that I saw 1, maybe 2 years ago. And he proceeds to describe this beautiful brunette wearing a red leather demon hand bikini out there on the smoking deck, smoking a cigar. And as he's talking, my eyes are filling up. I'm smiling, but my eyes are filling up with tears. And he's like, what's happening? What just happened? And I said, that girl, that was my best friend, Tammy Archuleta. And she was killed in Afghanistan last year. But she would be so happy to know that you remembered her like that, because unfortunately, sometimes she, like a lot of women, struggled with, her self-esteem and stuff. And so to be known as a goddess in a red leather demon bikini would have really pleased her. And John was visibly shaken by that. But that was it was definitely like a moment that solidified our friendship and stuff. And I believe that's where he started the tradition of dedicating his books to her, was because of that conversation.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's a really long story. Sorry about all that.
No. Those are exactly the kind of stories that we love on this show.
That has a little bit of everything in it, doesn't it? A little bit of everything.
Yeah, you had us from the beginning on that one.
Honestly, I don't think you could have had a better "This is how I met John Ringo" story than that.
And dressed in a red leather bikini. And
Right.
Yeah, all the elements.
The last time Scott was in a red leather bikini was not.
Right before the show started.
Yeah.
That was an interesting few minutes when it was just you.
Right. We have the awkward pre-show sometimes we like to do. It goes with Joan.
What are you wearing, baby?
So tell us
Like
about Minds of Men. It's your first novel, and it's the book one of your Psych of War series. So tell us a little bit about that.
All right, so Minds of Men is the story of Evelyn Adamson. She is a psychic woman, and in this, I think probably the best term to describe the Psyche of War series overall is as like a secret history, because I don't really change any of the major events of history. I just add in some stuff that, isn't really real, but maybe it could have been, kind of thing. So in this universe, psychics have always existed, but they're always only women because I'm sexist, and also because because the characters don't know this yet in the story because it's only 1943. But the reason for it is I decided that it takes 2 copies of a gene that only shows up on the X chromosome. So men can carry it, but can't typically manifest psychic ability beyond what humans sort of normally have in terms of intuition and whatnot. But some women can. And so in this story, the women have traditionally, who have this ability, most of them aren't really strong enough to do much with it, but they've traditionally kind of kept it on the down low because it carries with it the stigma of witchcraft and evil and all that kind of stuff, until the U.S. Army comes calling. Because I don't know if you know anything about World War II aviation history, but in 1943, there was a group called 8th Air Force, which flew American B-17 bombers out of airfields in England, bombing the European mainland. And they were getting their asses handed to them because they didn't have a long-range fighter escort that could take them all the way to their targets and then back without having to stop and refuel. And so the way that they would compensate for this is the B-17's nickname was the Flying Fortress. And the reason it's called that, and I'm going to do the pilot thing on top of my hand, so I apologize if that's annoying, but if you can imagine my hand is the airplane, they'd have, gunners in the nose, gunners on the sides, gunner in the tail, one on top, one on the bottom, and they would fly very close formation, like that sort of, so that they would have crossing fields of fire. Just like, if you can imagine like a star fort, right? Right. Which worked relatively well as long as they could fly very tight formation. The problem is flying tight formation is difficult in modern day aircraft, let alone in the aircraft with the kind of primitive instrumentation that the B-17, instrumentation and avionics, by which I mostly mean like their radios and stuff, that they had in 1943 in that era of technology. Dudes, man.
I think we're losing you a little bit here, Kacey, aren't we?
Just having a little bit of
the lockup.
Okay, well, while she works about that, we can work on that. And
just on the notes of what Kacey was saying,
we chatted.
It's only recently. It's only recently come out, but there's a third part of the series that started with Band of Brothers. Second part was Pacific. The third one is the Mighty Eighth.
Yes.
They've just released a trailer for that. It looks harrowing, but it's all in the perspective of one of the Flying Fortresses. Man, it's glorious in some ways what they did, but man, I wouldn't want to be in one of those tin cans.
Absolutely crazy the things that they would do. So back to my story
yeah, go ahead.
Talking about the instrumentation being not so great for that formation.
Right. So it was very hard to do what they had to do, in other words. So in my story, the thought is, what if, the General Ira Eaker equivalent, knew about these women for some reason. Maybe he was married to one of them. And what if he said, well, until we can get the long-range fighter escort here, which we've been promised and should be here in a number of months, what if in the meantime we put some of these women on board, and that'll allow you guys to react quicker. It'll take out, there's I think it's at least in pilot training, they teach us there's like a 3 to 5 second delay between hearing a command and actually being able to manifest, react to it.
Right.
But if you can take some of that delay out by having a direct telepathic link, maybe that's the difference between staying close enough to defend your buddy and being able to be separated from the herd and then therefore being vulnerable, etc. So long story really, or short story really, really long, they take these women and put them on these B-17s and they have to experience what that feels like. But not only do they experience it, through their own senses, because they're psychically linked with, the 10 men flying this aircraft, they experience it tenfold through all of those minds as well. And so that's sort of where the title comes from, or why I chose that, that particular line for the title. The title itself actually comes from the Air Force song, which was at the time the Army Air Corps song. So.
Excellent. Now, you're a pretty big fan of history. We chatted on the messenger the other day. You have some big history podcasts. So I like that, where you just meld in your storyline into actual events. I think probably all of us like history.
There's just so much. I mean, truth really is stranger than fiction, so there's just so much out there that I find inspiring and interesting. And it's fun to tweak and play with the sort of what if scenarios and stuff. So
how long do you see your series going?
Right now I have plans for 3 books. The first one was, like I said, set in World War II. The second one will actually pick up very quickly after that. It actually starts with, the opening scene starts with the Berlin airlift. And the protagonist of the second book is actually the antagonist of the first one. So if you've read the story, the antagonist is a German psychic named Lena, who is hunting my American psychic, Evelyn, through occupied Europe. And then so this picks up her story after the fall of Berlin and after she has to, go through that traumatic experience and, what happens next? What does she do next? So.
That sounds like a sort of such brilliant series potential there. I mean,
thank you.
The 3 books, but you've got the scope of World War II, which is obviously vast and cataclysmic, but then melds into the Cold War as well, doesn't it? And I suppose are you talking about the early days of sort of the Cold War?
Yes, yeah, sort of with the establishment of the German Democratic Republic and sort of what does that do? And I envision it as being mostly like a spy thriller. And I'm going to talk a little bit about interactions with with Western intelligence and things along the line of, if you're familiar with Operation Paperclip, which was where German scientists were smuggled out by Western powers in order to keep them out of the hands of the Soviets. And so there's going to be a little bit of that going in there. And then the third book will be set in 1968 at the height of Vietnam. And the protagonist for that one she has like a bit part in the first book. She's a black psychic named Pearl Silvers from Atlanta. And in 1968, obviously she'll be all grown up. Her grown son will be, I think I'm going to have him be a Marine in Vietnam, and he will go missing. And she will call in some favors to get put back in country to go looking for her boy. So
cool.
That's the plan so far. We'll see how it turns out.
Well, as someone who's a massive fan of, both kind of spy thrillers and World War II historical stuff, bye is what I'm going to be doing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
It sounds absolutely fantastic stuff, and right down my interest line. So brilliant, and especially with your, for want of a better word, pedigree that you're bringing to it. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. I mean that in the nicest way. Well, I'm not saying you're a dog.
No, I do. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the third book because, I'm a Huey pilot, right? And a Huey is the quintessential Vietnam helicopter. And I'm looking forward to the third book simply because I want to write scenes which showcase, the badassery that is my aircraft.
There you go. Right. That'll be fantastic.
Well, I'm a plane geek as well. My degree's in aerospace technology. I got a pilot's license before I learned to drive.
Nice.
I'd absolutely love to geek out with you. Kacey, but I know
we should definitely talk.
We'll have a follow-on episode. It'd be like Keystroke Medium, the Geeky Air Show, or something like that. That'd be awesome. It'd be epic. We should, Josh, hit our sponsor, and then we can maybe go into some craft and stuff.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
So this episode is kind of a kind of a cool sponsor. It's Deadly Refuge by Drew Avery. He's been on the show several times before, and not only is he sponsoring this episode with his audiobook, he's giving away 3 audiobook codes with his sponsorship. So the codes are available to the live audience only. Apologize if you're listening on the audio feed later. But shame on you. You should have been here for the live show. So I will read the blurb, and then we'll do a set up the giveaway, and we'll probably let it ride till the end of the show, and then do the randomization and hand them out. So the blurb goes like this: a stolen ship, a mission on the line, enemies at every turn. After 4 months of hiding, Brindle Quinn can't delay his mission any longer. His ship, the Replicade, is held together with failing patches and needs to make repairs in a port. Unfortunately, the nearest world with proper facilities is situated deep in the Gershang-owned enemy territory. The Gershang colony of Ferex is a safe hold for piracy in the region, and none is more vile than Crace Tuin, a man known for trafficking people and weapons across the Elorian galaxy. He has a reputation as the only pilot never to lose a ship, with the exception of the Replicade. When Grace finds the Replicade, he vows to claim the lives of those who stole her, but Brindle won't go down without a fight. Deadly Refuge is the second book in the Elorian Wars military space opera series for fans of The Expanse, Star Trek, and Old Man's War. So I'll put the link for the audiobook in the live chat, and if you don't win a free copy, you can go there and purchase a copy if you want. Please do so. We have 3 audiobook codes, and I will set up a thread in the Keystroke Medium Facebook account, or group rather, and if you are a member there, go there and make a comment in this post, and we'll do the giveaway here at the end of the show. So, okay, Ralph, you want to lead us into the craft discussion, please?
Okay, yeah, sure.
We're doing crafts.
Just before we do, we've got just asked if there's any questions from the audience. One from JR Handley. I'm not going to ask. Sorry, JR.
Spoiled again. JR, get on your good behavior.
Yeah, consider it finger waving at you and behave.
JR's an old friend of mine too.
JR's awesome. We love JR. He's always on the show.
So from Combo, has any other media, films, games, etc. you've consumed influenced your writing?
So media other than books, is that what she's saying?
Yeah, that's how I'm reading the question. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, certainly there's phenomenal movies out there about World War II and World War II aviation. 12 O'Clock High is a classic. Memphis Belle is a newer classic. A lot of that stuff I, use as not necessarily direct research, but, inspirational research, I guess, for this particular book. In terms of games, for me, the stuff that's intriguing about games, see, I myself am not a gamer, but my husband is, and a lot of times I'll watch him play because it's like watching a movie unfold. And the stuff that interests me the most about games are the character interactions. It's kind of a lot of the stuff that is interesting to me about movies and books and stuff too. So there's, there were a couple of scenes in the book that I sort of envisioned kind of cinematically, I guess, that were very much, I pictured as if they were a movie or as if they were a cutscene in a video game, just because, that was just how I framed it up in my mind. But by far the most inspirational stuff that I used for this particular story were the books that I read, that I acknowledged in the acknowledgements, oddly enough.
It's weird how it goes there. I don't know why.
Right. But there was one that was a book called Combat Crew, and it was essentially this gentleman's war diary. He was a flight engineer / gunner. That was the title of his crew position on the B-17. And he kept a diary, and he wrote about his experiences and some experiences that were related to him, by friends of his. And it was very visceral and it was very real. And I took a lot of the that's where a lot of like the feel of the flying scenes and the air combat scenes came from, was from his book. And then there were, in the second half of the book, here's a little spoiler alert, at a certain point,
we do spoilers. We love spoilers.
Evie's, Evelyn's aircraft gets shot down, and she and some of her surviving crew members have to basically evade capture through occupied Europe. And they do so with the assistance of a resistance-led escape line, which I had it just be one line, but there were multiple escape lines throughout World War II. And researching the work of the men and women who did those things and who assisted, I mean, we're talking hundreds, if not thousands of Allied, I think it was hundreds, I'm not sure. But just a vast number of Allied airmen, they assisted them to evade capture and escape and, you know, to return to fight again. And some of those stories are just breathtaking. There's one in particular that it was so cool I had to basically steal it and put it in the book.
Nice.
And so that's where the majority of the inspiration for this particular story came from, was from the books I read.
Awesome. Do you have more questions from the chat? Otherwise, I'm sure Josh and Ralph and I got a bunch of things to dig into. I had one. Let me go, since I'm gonna pull show host status and move to the front of the line there. When you're writing with all the, there you go. Yeah, when you're writing with all the because your character obviously psychic and in multiple people's heads, is that difficult to write? Is there something, because it seems like a kind of a unique writing skill to do that?
So the way that I did it is, I actually kind of got this technique, I guess, from reading Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Rider books, where a lot of the dialogue takes place between dragon and rider, and it's, you know, telepathic. And the way that she indicates that is just through the use of italics. So I treated it like dialogue, but it happens in italics versus, you know, in standard quotes. So that was, I did it like that, but then I also, there were some, like when one of the people in the psychic connection is hurt, you know, it's possible for someone else within that network to feel that. And I just sort of treated that as, you know, that sensation as something that the psychic character herself was experiencing. So it wasn't particularly difficult, but I think had I not grown up reading dragons talking in their minds to writers, it probably would have been something that it took me a little bit longer to figure out. It just seemed natural to do it that way.
Right, that makes sense. I read the series, it's been a while. What else we got?
Ken McClellan's, I mean, this is the one we always like to ask anyway. Are you a plotter or a pantster?
That's what I was
and why? I know Richard put my money on, but go on.
So I go both ways.
Of course,
Josh.
I also
Josh will be back with us in about 15 minutes.
Did I break him? I'm sorry.
No, across the line.
Ridiculous, all of you guys.
Anyway.
I like to have an idea of where I'm going. I don't always get there. And so I do a lot of co-writing. And I find that certainly when co-writing, it's vastly more helpful if you have at least a basic outline of, you know, hey, these are the scenes, this is what we're going to do. And if nothing else, then to figure out who's writing what. So from that outline, or from that perspective, I like to plot. But on my own, a lot of times I just sort of wing it. So I don't know. Like I said, I go both ways.
I'd like to outline. I like the idea of outlining, but oftentimes my outlines get out of control. This is not in the outline. I'm writing it anyway. I don't care.
That being said, so I don't know if you guys are familiar with Griffin Barber. He's a phenomenal writer. He recently released a book called 1636 Mission to Moogals with Eric Flint. And Griffin and I are working together on a project, and he shared this outline tool with me that Eric Flint gave to him, and it's super useful. It doesn't get down into the weeds like a lot of outlines do. It's just basically, you know, this is the scene, here's the who, what, where, when, and then the ramifications of it, and I love it. And so when I am co-writing, that's typically the tool that I'll use.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I had asked in one of my newsletters about books and what people liked, and I haven't read any of the 1636 books by Eric Flynn, but a lot of people really get into those, and I just pulled them up on Amazon, and that's a, I'm gonna have to read that.
It's a really, like, I mean, if you're into alternate history, it's probably one of the seminal alternate history series out there. It starts with 1632, and then I think the sequel is 1633, and then I think from there it starts to diverge. It's this whole. It's not only is it a seminal alternate history series, but it's also a seminal shared world series, because what Eric and what Bain did with developing the Grantville Gazette and doing all of these co-written novels is really fascinating, because they have this whole entire rich world. Griff's book Mission of the Mughals, which you can read that one without having read any of the other stuff, and you really should. It's so good. Griff did like a ton of research on the Mughal Empire in India, and it's fascinating the way that he's able to, weave that tapestry of, hey, this is these people's way of life. This is what they were doing. This is, because it's something that, honestly, I didn't know anything about before I looked at his book for the first time. So, yeah, really, really cool stuff. But yeah, it's a great series.
So we were talking about plotting versus pantsing, and I think we established that doing either ways is the best thing. So we can just never ask that question again in any further interviews. It's been covered. It's done. We got it worked out. It will be done forever.
I was curious to ask, the short stories that you write are predominantly more science fiction-y than past, still relevant past normal history. Do you have a preference on which genre do you like to write, and why?
I don't know if I actually do have a preference. I prefer to read fantasy, I guess. So maybe, I don't know, maybe I prefer to write fantasy, but the opportunities that have come my way have been mostly science fiction and military science fiction. And I appreciate, they say write what you know, right? Well, I'm a career military officer and an aviator, and it's, so that dovetails nicely with the field of science fiction and military science fiction. And so that's allowed me to utilize my, my day job knowledge and experience in a new way. So I don't know. What I like to write are emotional experiences. And I think those two, and this is probably going to sound super snobby, and I don't mean it that way, but I think to a certain extent, those somewhat transcend genre. And so if it's a story that'll kick me in the gut when I'm writing it, or a story that'll kick me in the gut when I'm reading it, that's what I'm all about. That's what I'm after.
I think that emotion, it does transcend genre, and all of my favorite stories, regardless of genre, they have to have that. I mean, that's what turns the engine, in my opinion.
For me, it does, certainly.
Do you focus when you write? Do you typically like to have a main female character or a military person in your stories that you build off of, so you can use that experience, or does it just kind of happen naturally?
It depends on the story. It either comes organically or it doesn't. I write mainly female characters, probably because it's easiest, but I enjoy writing male characters. One of the things that was interesting about writing Minds of Men was that I had to try and figure out what would the inside of a man's mind feel like. Oh, God. And I have no idea, because obviously I'm a woman, and it's not the kind of thing that I can.
Lies madness for
right? And if I was to go to my husband and be like, "All right, baby, what does the inside of your head feel like?" He'd give me this look, like, Are you kidding me right now?
Right.
So what do you think? What do you think?
Right.
Food,
So-
Xbox.
That's pretty much it. We're done.
My husband is an amazing man, and I cannot say enough about him. And he's super patient with me, hiding away up here in our bedroom and writing away for hours at a time. And he's great, with the girls and everything like that. We have 2 daughters. But there's times when he's just like, "Baby, I love you, but you're being crazy right now." So, and to be fair, he's right. So
I tell my wife the same thing, and she's not a writer, so I.
Yeah, well, he's got a double dose because not only am I a writer, I'm a helicopter pilot, and both are by definition insane. So there you go.
There you go.
Doubly insane.
Got to be able to.
Have you guys heard of the Hot Crazy Matrix? Have you guys heard of that?
Love that video.
I saw that where they have like the graph and like yeah.
So because I'm a
science.
capricious, because I'm a capricious female, naturally, I asked my husband. I was like, "Babe, all right, where do I fall?" And clearly it's
This
a trap.
is not a trick question.
And my husband, being the genius that he is, answered in the only way that was possible. He looked at me, without missing a beat, no hesitation. He goes, "Baby, you have always been a 10-10 to me."
There you go. This matrix doesn't even cover you.
This is why I love him. He's the only dude I've ever met who can no shit handle me.
Yeah.
I showed my wife that video one time, and she's like, "So where do I fall?" And I'm like, "That's for you to make the decision on. I know where you're at."
Was it with her arms folded and was she tapping her foot?
Yeah, right.
The
Exactly.
correct answer is they haven't even made a matrix for you yet, baby.
Yeah.
That's what you tell them.
Off the charts. Off the
Off the
charts.
charts. Something like that.
So, are
That's
you
danger
working now
zone.
on the sequel to Minds and Men? When can we expect that?
I'm actually not working on it yet. I'm currently working on Assassin, which is a book in the Four Horsemen universe created by Mark Wandry and Chris Kennedy. Their brilliant creation, which has been so much fun to write in. So I'm working on finishing that up I'm co-writing that with my friend Marisa Wolf. It'll be her first novel. So super excited to be part of her debut because she's a phenomenal writer. She and I have written together online for years, playing with different things, and I think you guys are really going to like her. And then
What was her name again?
Marisa Wolf. Yeah. When she comes to con with her husband, we call them the Wolf Pack.
Nice.
And then so there's that. We're hoping to finish that up this month, as well as the project I mentioned with Griffin Barber, which is a sci-fi noir, essentially. That one we're hoping to finish up the further this month too. So next on the docket for me is book 2 in the Last Judgment's Fire series, which I'm co-writing with John Ringo and Chris Smith for Bane.
Oh wow.
And then
That's awesome.
yeah, so we finished the
dream.
first. Right, like I said, he handed it to me on a silver platter. Built me a whole banquet. But the first book in that series, the draft is done. It's with John, and so Chris and I are going to be moving on to beginning the draft of the second book here next month. And in addition to that, I'm working with Mark Wandry on another Four Horsemen book called Weaver. Which I think you guys are gonna. I hope people really enjoy it. It's a cool concept.
So which one is which project is the one that's the Cat Assassin?
That's story? Assassin. Yeah, that's the one that Marisa and I are doing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I saw a whole bunch of flurry on that, and I think that's going to be a really, really kick-ass novel.
The Cat Assassin.
I hope so. Yes.
Well, as
so.
a crazy cat guy, I'm quite up to that one. So.
I know. We should have a cat showdown.
Well, Pearl wanted to be on the show, but I kicked her off.
Versus Pearl, was it?
And that character's that's your feature character in the 3 short stories you have, right? For the
well, 2. So the first Cat Assassin story is the one in A Fistful of Credits, and that is her name is Rio, and she's from a race called the Depik. They're these felinoid aliens that can do some strange things that no one can really figure out, which we do sort of explain in the novel a little bit. So hopefully people will find that interesting. And then so that was her first story. And then the story Lessons, which was in The Good, the Bad, and the Merc, which just came out last Friday. That was Rio's origin story, essentially. Rio is she's not the main character of Assassin. The main characters are actually her 4 children, which you meet in the very first story, Gilded Cage, at the very end. So
very neat.
Awesome.
You seem extremely busy. Yeah. How do you find the time to smash all that into your life with 3 novel projects and short stories and flying helicopters and mommying?
I've just got visions of you, like, so with a little laptop or something on top of your console. Like, bear with us, guys. Bear with us.
Stand by,
straight level. Stop stressing. I've just got this chapter to finish.
I am extremely lucky with my support system. But I try to, there are days, well, I don't know. I just, I don't really know how it all works out. My job here in our mission here in the National Capital Region requires, we have like an alert commitment where, like this weekend I was at work from Thursday night to Sunday night, and we don't fly that whole time. Part of the time we're just hanging around. And so I do a lot of writing while I'm on alert. So that when I do come home, I can spend time, with my kids and stuff. And it's actually been, on my days off now that the littlest one has started pre-K, there's usually some time during the day when I can sit down and knock out, a couple hundred words, 1,000 words or something like that. And then I'll try to do some at night, particularly after the little one goes to bed. My kids are, my oldest is turning 15 this week, and then my youngest is 4. So there's a wide range of needs there. And the 15-year-old is pretty much just as happy to have me go hide in my room while she hides in her room sometimes. So she's pretty self-sufficient.
It's like the Cold War kind of,
Yeah. Yeah. But the baby requires a little bit more attention. And so when I'm home, I try to give her priority most of the time. My husband might laugh to hear me say that, because sometimes he's like, I come up here and I hide and I write, and he handles her.
Okay, well, I'm going to do the random number deal for our giveaway, and then we'll move on from there. Looks like there's 4 in the post: JR, Rick, Ken, and EA. So we'll roll 1 and see where we get. Number 3 is, okay, the first one goes to Ken, second one goes to Rick, and the third one goes to EA. I'm not gonna mess up her last name. You guys know, you're watching, so I will get with you guys after the show and get you the numbers. Sorry, JR, you didn't win this time.
Ha, JR, take that.
Next time, I assume that next time you will win. So
JR's won before, right?
I think
surely he's won some of our contests.
He's not a complete loser, so.
Right.
I want JR to like PM me his question, because I'm super curious as to what it was.
Yeah, I missed it.
We can.
I missed the question. I was involved.
Are you going to admit the supremacy of the army, or superiority of the army?
Oh, is that his question? Well, we can talk about
am I going to admit the superiority of the army? No, I'm not going to.
Yeah. Yeah,
there you go. Close question.
Because not only is the guest in the Air Force, the host was in the Air Force too. So JR, your question is invalid and
wrong.
I will say that I am very proud. As a helicopter pilot, I'm very proud of my professional heritage, which does come largely from Army aviation. So that's a connection that I'm super proud of. Super proud to bear. But
it is what it is.
And I was in security forces in the Air Force, and we like to call that the infantry army of the Air Force. We were the dumb. And we stood out on the flight line in the really cold weather Oh, and don't come close to this thing so other smarter people can use them. So
Was it like when you went to recruiting station? Was it like that scene from Starship Troopers? Good for you, son.
Yeah.
Air Force Security made me the man I am today.
Knowing what I know now, it completely makes sense what the recruiter said to me when I told him I want to be security forces, because I took the ASFAB and turned in my scores and everything, and the recruiter was like, "Oh wow, okay, so what do you want to do?" And I was like, "I want to be a cop." And he stopped and he looked at me and he was like, "You want to be a cop?" And then he looked down at the paper again. He's like, "You can do everything on this except like nuclear biochemic scientist something. You can do everything on this paper right here." And I said, "Yeah, I want to be a cop." And he's like, "Okay," signed the paper.
Okay.
But little did I know that
for you.
every other career field that you choose in the Air Force, if you go to their tech school and you fail out, they send you to security forces tech school. So like it's a catch-all for everyone.
Maybe you're just cutting.
Yeah, but that all being said, though, I will say my first assignment when I was flying in Montana, we worked really closely with the missile field security forces, whose job it was to take care of that stuff. And the guys that were in our TRF, which is, I think it stood for Tactical Response Flight, they'd fly with us. Those dudes were smart as you like. I'm really trying to edit my language. I'm sorry, guys. They were
on this show.
Yeah, no, they were just, I mean, they were so sharp, and they would go to these insane schools, you know, like they got to go to sniper school and a bunch of other stuff that I don't even know what it was called, but they were great guys and really sharp and knew their job and always happy to, you know, discuss tactical situations with us and employment situations with us and stuff. So yeah, they're within the Air Force, there's a bit of a stereotype of, you know, the dumb cop or whatever. But I will say that in my experience, personally, that's been far from true. So, so there you go.
I thank you and bow my head. Thank you.
We're not going to live this down for months. Thanks.
Look, I told you guys, and I've told you guys for months that I am smart and I know what I'm talking about. And Kacey just confirmed everything I've told you guys.
Yeah. So take that, JR.
Yeah. But we are coming to the end of the hour, and it's been a fantastic time talking with you, Kacey, and thank you so much. We're gonna have you back on because I'm really curious to talk. We generally talk a lot more about craft and different things that I'd love to talk about collaborations with you, how you're doing them with and how you're doing them with the other people. We'll definitely have to have you back on in season.
I would love that. Yeah, and I'm sorry for the difficulty at the beginning.
Yeah. No, don't worry about it. You know, normally I do the sound checks before the show, and this weekend just got super busy and I didn't get around to it. We should have had it figured out already, so that's my mistake.
We'll move into the post show, and you guys listen to my tornado sentence.
And then we can curse a whole bunch. So
lots of swearing and inappropriate jokes about Josh's career path.
That's right. Everybody that hung out in the live chat with us, thank you guys so much for hanging out. If you're watching live, we will have a second show here in about half an hour or so. We're going to be talking to Jennifer Ellis and Sam Peralta, Chris Parteau, Risa Walker, and the rep for Pets for Vets.
Huge show. Show.
It's going to be the biggest guest show we've ever had. So if it turns into a big cluster, it's going to be really fun, and you're not going to want to miss it.
It's going to be the Keystroke Media mosh pit. That's
right.
We're going to break Google Hangouts, aren't we?
Yeah, we are going to break the interweb with the next show. So, Kacey, thank you again so much for coming on. It was a blast, and hopefully,
thank you for having me.
Agree to come back on the next Shenanigan Field show.
Name the day, man. I'm here.
Ooh, nice. I like that. For Ralph Kern and Scott Moon, I am Josh Hayes. You have been live with Kacey Ezell. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Make sure you come back next time. We're going to talk about some reading. We're going to talk about some writing and, of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. You guys have a fantastic Monday.